Deep in the heart of Renaissance Florence, a powerful family was quietly collecting secrets. They gathered ancient wisdom, rare knowledge, and untold stories, not with swords or armies, but with paper, ink, and gold. What they built was not just a fortune, but a treasure trove of human thought, a silent engine that reshaped Europe. For centuries, the Medici family amassed book collections so vast and so groundbreaking, they were truly shocking. Their obsession with old texts and new ideas led to libraries that changed everything. Number 1. The San Marco Vault of Wonders, Cosimo de Medici's Quiet Revolution. Cosimo de Medici was not just a banker, he was a visionary with an almost obsessive love for books. In the early 1400s, Florence hummed with new ideas, but ancient texts were scattered, hidden in dusty monasteries, or simply lost. Where Cosimo saw something in these old papers, a power that others did not quite grasp. His grand project was not a palace for himself, but a library for the people, or at least for the scholars he supported. He decided to build a new wing for the Dominican monastery of San Marco. This was not a small donation, it was a massive undertaking, a deliberate act to foster learning. He hired Michelozzo, a brilliant architect, to design the new spaces. Michelozzo crafted a spacious hall, long and bright, with tall windows that let in the Tuscan sun. The room was designed for reading and quiet study, a place where minds could wander through centuries. This was different from the crowded, dark scriptoria of earlier times. This was a dedicated space, a beacon for humanism. Even before the word was widely used, Cosimo did not just provide the building, he filled it. His agents scoured Europe, seeking out forgotten manuscripts. Vespasiano da Bisticci, a renowned Florentine bookseller and copyist, was a key player in this operation. Vespasiano was more than a merchant. He was a human catalog, a network of scholars and scribes. Cosimo told him to find every available text, particularly those in Greek and Latin. Vespasiano dispatched his agents far and wide, buying old volumes and commissioning new copies. One story tells of Cosimo instructing Vespasiano to make a complete collection of Latin and Greek classics. Vespasiano hired 45 scribes who worked for nearly 2 years. They copied text after text, page after page, creating a vast body of knowledge. These were not just quick reproductions. The scribes were meticulous, their handwriting beautiful, their corrections precise. They worked on expensive parchment, often with elaborate illuminations and decorated initials. The collection at San Marco grew rapidly. It included rare works by classical authors like Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, and Virgil. There were also important Christian texts, theological works, and early scientific treatises. For example, a complete set of Livy's Ab Urbe Condita, a history of Rome, was a prized possession. Copies of Euclid's Elements of Geometry, a fundamental text, found their way onto the shelves. The library also held works by early church fathers like Augustine and Jerome. Cosimo's personal collection was vast, and he famously loaned out his books to scholars. At San Marco, the books were not locked away. They were chained to the desks for security, but they were accessible to the scholars who resided at the monastery or were welcomed by Cosimo. This was a radical idea for the time. Knowledge was being shared, not hoarded. The San Marco Library became a hub for humanist thought. The scholars, like Nicoli, a close friend of Cosimo's and a fellow book enthusiast, used the library extensively. Nicoli himself had an impressive private collection, which he later bequeathed to San Marco upon his death, adding another significant layer to Cosimo's foundation. Nicoli's gift alone was said to be over 800 manuscripts, a huge number for the era. These manuscripts included crucial works of classical literature and early Renaissance thought. The library was meticulously organized. The books were arranged by subject, a novel concept for the time. This organization made it easier for scholars to find specific texts, enhancing their research. The books were bound in fine leather, often with the Medici coat of arms subtly stamped on the covers, a quiet mark of ownership and patronage. Cosimo's investment in San Marco went beyond the physical books. It was an investment in intellectual life. The scholars who gathered there, supported by Cosimo's generosity, produced new translations, commentaries, and original works. These new texts spread throughout Florence and beyond, influencing art, philosophy, and political thought. The quiet rustle of pages in the San Marco library heralded a new era of learning, all set in motion by Cosimo de Medici's deep commitment to books. Number 2, Piero the Gouty's hidden literary gems, a family secret unveiled. The Piero di Cosimo de Medici, often called Piero the Gouty, because of his crippling illness, inherited his father Cosimo's passion for books, even if his health kept him from the same public life. Piero was not as outwardly grand as his father, but his love for illuminated manuscripts and rare texts was equally profound. He maintained and expanded the family's private collection, keeping many of its most precious items within the Medici palace itself. This was the collection that served the family directly, a private intellectual playground. While his father focused on establishing public access through San Marco, Piero refined and deepened the core family library. He was particularly interested in exquisite copies of classical texts and religious works, often commissioning artists to create stunning illuminations for them. These were not just books, they were works of art, each page a testament to craftsmanship and wealth. Piero continued to employ agents like Vespasiano da Bisticci to acquire new volumes. Vespasiano's records speak of Piero's specific tastes. He wanted texts that were not only academically valuable, but also beautiful objects. He collected volumes on history, philosophy, poetry, and theology. Among his prized possessions was a richly illustrated copy of Pliny the Elder's Natural History, a vast encyclopedic work from ancient Rome. This volume would have been a treasure, detailing the natural world, geography, and ancient beliefs. Another significant acquisition for Piero was a Greek manuscript of Ptolemy's Geography. This ancient text, almost lost to the Western world, contained maps and instructions for map-making. Its rediscovery and study helped revolutionize cartography in the Renaissance. Piero recognized its profound importance and ensured a beautiful copy was made for his collection. His son, Lorenzo, would later make great use of it. Piero also commissioned beautiful Latin texts. He had copies of Virgil's Aeneid and Horace's Odes, created often with intricate initial letters and border decorations painted by leading Florentine illuminators. These books were not merely for reading, they were for display, for quiet contemplation, and for showing off the family's sophisticated taste. The Medici Palace itself served as a secure and elegant home for this growing collection. The books were kept in a specific room, likely on the piano nobile, the main living floor. They would have been stored in wooden chests or on shelves, protected from dust and damp. The air in this room would have carried the faint scent of aged parchment and leather, a quiet perfume of knowledge. Piero's son, Lorenzo, grew up surrounded by these literary treasures. The influence of his father's careful curation cannot be overstated. Lorenzo learned to read, write, and think critically among these very books. He absorbed the knowledge contained within them, setting the stage for his own remarkable intellectual development. The family's access to these ancient texts, particularly the Greek ones, gave them a distinct advantage in the burgeoning humanist movement. The private nature of Piero's collection did not mean it was unused. Scholars and intellectuals often visited the Medici Palace. They consulted these precious manuscripts, debated their contents, and translated them. For example, the Greek philosopher Argyropoulos often visited the palace and advised Piero on the acquisition of Greek texts. He would read and discuss the texts with Piero and his young son Lorenzo. This informal salon atmosphere allowed for the free exchange of ideas, directly fueled by the books in Piero's possession. Piero's careful expansion of the family library also included a focus on manuscripts written in the new humanist script. This clear, legible script was a deliberate break from the dense Gothic script of the medieval period. It showed a commitment to making texts more accessible and aesthetically pleasing. His collection was a bridge between the scholarly efforts of his father and the grand intellectual explosion that would come with his son. Piero's efforts ensured that the Medici family library remained a vibrant, growing entity, ready for its next great transformation. Number 3, Lorenzo the Magnificent's personal stash of ancient wisdom, a literary power play. Lorenzo de Medici, known as the Magnificent, inherited not just his father Piero's wealth and power, but also the deep-seated Medici obsession with books. For Lorenzo, collecting texts was more than a hobby. It was an integral part of his political strategy, his cultural patronage, and his personal intellectual journey. He took the family's private collection to unprecedented heights, laying the direct groundwork for what would become one of the world's most famous libraries. Lorenzo was a true Renaissance man, a poet, a statesman, a patron of the arts, and an insatiable collector of books. He understood that knowledge was power, and ancient knowledge, especially from Greece, was a source of immense prestige and influence. His agents, like the humanist scholar Angelo Poliziano and the merchant Giovanni Lascaris, traveled extensively, seeking out rare Greek and Latin manuscripts. They went to remote monasteries, visited old libraries, and even sailed to the Byzantine East, which was then collapsing, to rescue texts. One particularly famous mission involved Lascaris traveling to Constantinople. He returned with over 200 Greek manuscripts, a truly monumental haul. These texts included works by Homer, Plato, Aristotle, and many other classical authors, some of which had been almost completely unknown in Western Europe for centuries. Imagine the excitement among scholars when these ancient voices, silent for so long, suddenly began to speak again through these newly acquired parchments. Lorenzo also invested heavily in commissioning copies. He employed a stable of expert scribes, including figures like the famous humanist Bartolomeo Sanvito. These scribes worked tirelessly to produce accurate, beautiful, and sometimes exquisitely illuminated copies of the newly acquired texts. The quality of these copies was paramount. They were not just reproductions, but often considered works of art in themselves. The Laurentian Library, as it would later be known, was originally Lorenzo's personal collection within the Medici Palace. It was a dynamic, growing entity reflecting Lorenzo's wide-ranging interests. He collected works on philosophy, literature, history, law, medicine, astronomy, and theology. He had a particular fondness for Platonic philosophy, even establishing the Platonic Academy in Florence, where scholars met to discuss Plato's ideas, often using the very texts from Lorenzo's library. His collection contained a 1st century AD Virgil manuscript, a truly ancient and priceless object. It had early copies of Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy and Petrarch's Canzoniere. He acquired rare Hebrew texts and Arabic scientific treatises, demonstrating his broad intellectual curiosity. The diversity of the collection reflected Florence's position as a crossroads of cultures and ideas. Lorenzo's library was not just a static repository. It was a working library constantly being used by scholars, poets, and artists. Scholars like Poliziano and Marsilio Ficino regularly consulted the manuscripts for their own research and translations. Ficino, a central figure in the Platonic Academy, translated Plato's entire works into Latin for the first time using manuscripts from Lorenzo's library. This translation had an enormous impact across Europe. The physical arrangement of Lorenzo's library in the palace would have been impressive. While no specific layout diagrams survive, it is clear that the books were easily accessible. Lorenzo himself would often spend hours in the library, poring over texts, annotating them, and composing his own poetry inspired by the classics. The very air in that room would have been thick with the scent of old paper and new ideas. The library was also a symbol of Medici prestige. When dignitaries visited Florence, they would often be shown the magnificent collection, a clear demonstration of the family's intellectual sophistication and wealth. It was a subtle but powerful statement that Florence was a center of learning. Largely thanks to Medici patronage, Lorenzo's death in 1492 marked a turning point. His magnificent collection was dispersed for a short period after the Medici were expelled from Florence. However, the sheer importance of these texts ensured they would not be lost forever. The foundation Lorenzo built, text by text, scribe by scribe, was too significant to simply disappear. It was a testament to his extraordinary vision, a collection that truly embodied the spirit of the Renaissance. Number 4. The Laurentian Library's grand opening, a public monument to knowledge. After the Medici's return to power in Florence, the scattered fragments of Lorenzo the Magnificent's incredible library began to be reassembled. The goal was not just to put the books back together, but to create a monumental public library, a testament to Medici power and enduring intellectual ambition. This grand vision was brought to life largely by two Medici popes, Leo X and Clement VII. Giovanni de Medici, who became Pope Leo X, was Lorenzo the Magnificent's son. He inherited his father's deep love for books and learning. When the family was exiled from Florence, many of Lorenzo's precious manuscripts were sold or dispersed. As Pope, Leo X began the process of buying back these treasures, recovering as many as possible. He understood the immense value of these volumes, not just sentimentally, but for the future of scholarship. It was another Medici Pope, Giulio de Medici, who became Pope Clement VII, who truly pushed for the construction of a new, purpose-built library for these collected treasures. He commissioned Michelangelo, one of the greatest artists and architects of the age, to design the new building. This was not a small task. Michelangelo had to create a space that was both functional for a library and aesthetically stunning, worthy of the Medici name and the precious contents it would hold. Michelangelo's design for the Laurentian Library, known in Italian as the Biblioteca Medicia Lorenziana, was groundbreaking. It was built within the cloister of the Basilica of San Lorenzo, the Medici's parish church. The building itself was a work of art. The famous vestibule, with its grand staircase that seems to flow like liquid stone, was designed to impress and to create a sense of awe. The reading room was long and serene, filled with natural light from high windows. The desks in the reading room were designed to be both reading surfaces and storage units. Each desk had a built-in lectern and shelves underneath where the books would be kept. The books were chained to these desks to prevent theft, a common practice for valuable collections at the time. This chaining also meant that the books were always in their designated spot, making them easy to find. The chains were long enough to allow readers to comfortably use the books, but short enough to keep them within the library. The collection housed within these walls was truly extraordinary. It included the recovered manuscripts from Lorenzo's original collection, along with new acquisitions. There were thousands of volumes of ancient Greek texts by authors like Sophocles, Euripides, and Thucydides. There were complete Latin works by Cicero, Seneca, and Livy. It contained rare Hebrew and Arabic manuscripts, testament to the Medici's broad intellectual horizons. One of the most famous items in the Laurentian Library is the Scorciolupii Codex, a massive collection of 14th century Italian madrigals and ballads, one of the largest surviving sources of early Renaissance music. The Ammianus Marcellinus, a manuscript of the last great Roman historian, is another highlight, providing insights into the late Roman Empire. The Codex Laurentianus, a 10th century Greek manuscript of the plays of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, is considered one of the most important surviving manuscripts of ancient Greek drama. The library was structured to be accessible to scholars. It was not just a private display. It was a public institution allowing approved scholars to consult its vast resources. This accessibility was crucial for the spread of humanist ideas and the advancement of learning across Europe. Visiting scholars from all over the continent would travel to Florence specifically to study these texts. The Laurentian Library became a symbol of the Renaissance itself. Its architecture, its contents, and its purpose all spoke to a renewed interest in classical learning, a belief in the power of knowledge, and a commitment to its preservation and dissemination. It solidified Florence's position as a major intellectual center. The quiet turning of pages within its walls echoed the intellectual debates and discoveries that shaped the modern world. It stood, and still stands, as a monumental achievement of Medici patronage and a lasting gift to human scholarship. Number 5, Pope Leo X and the Vatican's expanding horizon, a Medici's papal legacy. Giovanni de Medici, the son of Lorenzo the Magnificent, became Pope Leo X in 1513. His papacy was marked by lavish patronage of the arts and a profound commitment to learning, directly extending the Medici family's bookish legacy to the very heart of the Catholic Church, the Vatican Library. This was not just adding a few books, it was a major expansion and reorganization that cemented the Vatican as one of Europe's premier intellectual centers. Leo X brought his family's humanist spirit to the papacy. He had grown up surrounded by the vast and precious collection of his father Lorenzo, and he deeply understood the power and prestige associated with owning and promoting knowledge. Upon his election, he immediately set about revitalizing the Vatican Library, which already held a significant collection, but one that Leo X aimed to greatly enhance. He appointed the humanist scholar Tommaso Inghirami as the prefect of the Vatican Library, a clear signal of his intentions. Inghirami, known for his vast learning and organizational skills, worked closely with Leo X to expand the collection systematically. They sent out agents to acquire new manuscripts from across Europe and the Near East. Many of these acquisitions were Greek text, continuing the Medici family's long-standing interest in classical Greek literature and philosophy. Leo X funded the translation of numerous Greek texts into Latin, making them accessible to a wider audience of Western scholars. This was a direct continuation of the work started by his father Lorenzo and scholars like Marsilio Ficino. He supported scholars who were skilled in ancient languages, providing them with resources and access to the library's growing collection. One of the most significant additions during Leo X's papacy was the acquisition of the entire library of the humanist scholar Janus Lascaris. Lascaris had accumulated an extraordinary collection of Greek manuscripts, many of which he himself had brought from the East. These included rare and unique copies of ancient Greek texts that greatly enriched the Vatican's holdings. This was a testament to Leo X's determination to acquire the best available resources. The Vatican Library, under Leo X, saw a substantial increase in its holdings of Hebrew manuscripts. This demonstrated an interest in biblical scholarship and a broader intellectual curiosity beyond classical Greek and Latin. These Hebrew texts provided new insights into ancient languages and religious traditions. Leo X also invested in the physical infrastructure of the library. He ensured the books were properly cared for, bound, and cataloged. The rooms within the Vatican Palace dedicated to the library were maintained and expanded to accommodate the growing collection. The books were arranged in an orderly fashion, making them easier for scholars to consult. The library became a hub for humanist scholarship and a center for intellectual activity during Leo X's pontificate. Scholars from across Europe flocked to Rome to use the Vatican's resources, drawing on its vast collection of ancient texts. The influence of the Vatican Library during this period cannot be overstated. It played a critical role in the dissemination of new ideas and the revival of classical learning. For example, Raphael, the famous painter, was commissioned by Leo X to paint frescoes in the Vatican Palace, and he often drew inspiration from the classical texts and figures found in the library. This showed the direct connection between the intellectual pursuits fostered by the library and the artistic explosion happening in Rome under Leo X. The knowledge contained in the library informed the visual culture of the age. The library's holdings were not merely for religious study. They included historical works, scientific treatises, medical texts, and works of literature. The breadth of the collection reflected the Renaissance's embrace of diverse fields of knowledge. Leo X's efforts ensured that the Vatican Library remained at the forefront of European intellectual life, a lasting monument to his family's commitment to books and learning. Number 6. Pope Clement VII's resilient papal collection, Weathering the Storm. Giulio de Medici, who became Pope Clement VII, faced immense challenges during his papacy, including political turmoil and the sack of Rome in 1527. Yet, despite these adversities, his commitment to books and the Vatican Library remained strong, building upon the foundations laid by his cousin Leo X. Clement VII ensured the Vatican Library not only survived but continued to grow, protecting its invaluable contents amidst chaos. Clement VII, like his Medici predecessors, was a dedicated patron of scholarship and the arts. He understood that the Vatican Library was not just a collection of books, it was a symbol of papal authority and a vital resource for the intellectual life of the Church and Europe. Even as his political power was threatened and Rome was plundered, he prioritized the safety and preservation of the library's treasures. During the horrific sack of Rome by imperial troops, many buildings were destroyed and valuable possessions stolen. The Vatican Library, however, largely escaped destruction, thanks in part to efforts to protect its most valuable manuscripts. Some precious items were reportedly hidden or moved to safety, reflecting the library's immense value. This resilience showed how much the Medici popes valued these collections. After the immediate crisis subsided, Clement VII resumed his efforts to enhance the library. He continued to acquire new manuscripts, though perhaps not at the same grand scale as Leo X, given the reduced papal finances. His focus was often on consolidating and cataloging existing holdings and ensuring their long-term security. Clement VII continued to support scholars working within the library. He maintained a staff of librarians, scribes, and conservators. The daily work of reading, copying, and studying continued even in the shadow of recent devastation. This continuity was critical for the library's ongoing vitality. One notable aspect of Clement VII's papacy was his interest in the history of the Church and religious reform. The library's theological collections were extensive, providing crucial resources for debates and discussions that shaped the religious landscape of Europe. Scholars could access ancient biblical texts, commentaries by church fathers, and historical accounts of councils and doctrines. Clement VII also had a particular interest in cartography and exploration. The Vatican Library held significant maps and geographical treatises, and the Pope would have consulted these as new discoveries were being made across the globe. For example, he engaged with reports from explorers and commissioned maps that incorporated new geographical knowledge. The architectural plans for the Laurentian Library in Florence, begun under Leo X, continued under Clement VII. Even while battling the Holy Roman Emperor and facing the Protestant Reformation, Clement VII maintained his commitment to Michelangelo's grand design. He understood that this project in Florence, separate from the Vatican Library but born of the same Medici intellectual ambition, was a lasting testament to his family's cultural legacy. He would often receive updates on its progress and provide funding for its construction. Clement VII's efforts ensured that the Vatican Library remained a beacon of learning despite turbulent times. The library's rich collection of Greek, Latin, and Hebrew manuscripts continued to serve as a vital resource for scholars of theology, history, philosophy, and the sciences. The steady acquisition of new texts and the careful preservation of existing ones meant that the library's holdings continued to grow in depth and breadth. The careful attention given by Clement VII to the Vatican Library, even during a period of great crisis, reflected a deep understanding of the enduring power of knowledge and the importance of preserving intellectual heritage. Number 7, Cosimo I's Grand Ducal State Library, consolidating power and knowledge. Cosimo I de Medici rose to power in Florence after a period of instability. As the first Grand Duke of Tuscany, he consolidated Medici rule and sought to establish a strong, centralized state. His approach to libraries reflected this desire for order, prestige, and control. He aimed to create a grand ducal library that would serve as a symbol of his authority and a resource for the state, merging various collections into a single, formidable entity. Cosimo I understood that a robust library was essential for a strong state. It provided access to legal texts for governance, historical accounts for political lessons, and scientific treatises for practical applications. He also aimed to reclaim and centralize the scattered Medici family manuscripts, that had been dispersed during earlier periods of exile. This was a deliberate act of historical and intellectual continuity. He devoted considerable resources to this endeavor. Agents were sent out to acquire manuscripts, not just from Italy, but from across Europe. Cosimo I was especially interested in rare and unique items, as well as texts that supported the Medici's political claims and historical narratives. He also continued the family tradition of commissioning beautiful copies of important works. The library, under Cosimo I, grew to include a vast array of subjects. There were extensive collections of legal texts reflecting the Grand Duke's focus on establishing clear laws and a strong bureaucratic system. He also had a keen interest in military strategy and acquired numerous treatises on warfare and fortifications. The scientific works, including texts on mathematics, astronomy, and medicine, were also highly valued. Cosimo I was also a strong patron of the Accademia Fiorentina, a scholarly institution dedicated to promoting the Tuscan language and classical studies. The Grand Ducal Library served as a primary resource for the academicians, providing them with the texts necessary for their research, translations, and scholarly debates. This direct link between the state library and a key intellectual academy demonstrated Cosimo's strategic use of knowledge. The location of this Grand Ducal Library shifted over time. Initially, it was housed within the Palazzo Vecchio, the seat of Florentine government, symbolizing the direct connection between knowledge and power. Later, parts of it were moved to the Uffizi, which also housed his vast art collections. This integration reflected Cosimo's view of all forms of knowledge and art as integral to the glory of his state. Among the notable acquisitions during Cosimo I's rule was the collection of the humanist scholar Vincenzo Borghini. Borghini's library was particularly rich in historical documents, Florentine chronicles, and literary works, providing invaluable primary sources for understanding the history of Tuscany. Incorporating such private collections into the state library further enhanced its depth and breadth. Cosimo I also initiated the detailed cataloging of the library's holdings. This was a massive undertaking, reflecting his desire for order and efficiency. Comprehensive catalogs made the vast collection accessible and manageable, ensuring that scholars and administrators could locate the specific texts they needed. This systematic approach was a hallmark of Cosimo's rule. The Grand Ducal Library under Cosimo I became a symbol of Medici's sovereignty and intellectual prowess. It housed not only the inherited treasures of his ancestors, but also new acquisitions that served the needs of a modern, centralized state. The sheer volume and diversity of its contents solidified Florence's reputation as a center of learning under the firm hand of the Grand Duke. This library was a clear statement. Knowledge was an instrument of power, and Cosimo I wielded it with precision. Number 8, Ferdinando I's esoteric and scientific trove, a Grand Duke's unique pursuits. Ferdinando I de Medici, Cosimo I's son, became Grand Duke in 1587. His approach to collecting books differed somewhat from his predecessors. While he maintained the family's commitment to classical learning, Ferdinando had a particular fascination with the esoteric, the scientific, and the practical arts. His library reflected a broader, more diverse range of interests, moving beyond pure humanism into the more experimental realms of knowledge. Ferdinando I was a deeply curious individual. He was interested in alchemy, astrology, and various forms of occult knowledge, which were considered legitimate fields of study in the late Renaissance. His agent sought out rare manuscripts on these subjects, adding a distinct flavor to the Medici collection. He also collected works on natural history, botany, and zoology, reflecting a growing interest in the natural world. His library was also rich in books related to medicine and pharmacy. Ferdinando had a practical mind and understood the importance of these fields for public health and economic prosperity. He supported the production of herbal remedies and commissioned books on the properties of plants and minerals. These were not just theoretical texts, they were often practical guides for pharmacists and physicians. Ferdinando was particularly interested in military engineering and fortification. His collection included numerous treatises on the design of fortresses, the use of artillery, and the strategy of siege warfare. These books were directly relevant to his role as a ruler responsible for the defense of Tuscany. He used the knowledge within these books to inform his own projects, such as the construction of new ports and defensive structures. The library was housed within the Palazzo Pitti, the grand new Medici residence on the other side of the Arno River. This location suggested a shift, reflecting the Grand Duke's personal domain. The books were carefully arranged and maintained, a testament to their value. Ferdinando would often consult these texts himself, especially those related to his more specialized interests. Among the specific acquisitions during Ferdinando's time was a significant collection of Arabic manuscripts, particularly those on mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. The Islamic world had preserved and advanced many ancient scientific texts, and Ferdinando recognized their importance. These acquisitions further diversified the Medici library, making it a truly international repository of knowledge. Ferdinando also continued the tradition of supporting Florentine academies and scholars. The library served as a vital resource for scholars engaged in experimental science and practical applications. He encouraged research into new technologies and supported voyages of exploration, often relying on the geographical and navigational texts within his library. The collection of printed books also grew significantly under Ferdinando. While earlier Medici focused heavily on manuscripts, the invention of printing meant that knowledge could be disseminated more widely. Ferdinando acquired many early printed editions, recognizing their value and accessibility. These printed books sat alongside the older, more precious manuscripts, forming a comprehensive collection of both ancient and modern knowledge. Ferdinando I's library was a reflection of the evolving intellectual landscape of the late Renaissance. It showed a move towards empiricism, the study of the natural world through observation, and a continued fascination with the hidden aspects of the universe. His unique collecting interests broadened the scope of the Medici library, ensuring it remained at the forefront of European thought, encompassing both the ancient and the cutting edge of his time. Number 9. Cosimo II's collection for the Accademia della Crusca, a language legacy. Cosimo II de Medici, who became Grand Duke in 1609, continued the family's deep commitment to learning and libraries, but with a refined focus. His particular interests lay in the Italian language itself, and he strongly supported the Accademia della Crusca, an institution dedicated to preserving and promoting the purity of the Tuscan language. His library collections reflected this specific linguistic and literary devotion. The Accademia della Crusca, founded in Florence in 1583, was a groundbreaking institution. Its primary goal was to create a comprehensive dictionary of the Italian language, a standard reference that would define proper Italian usage based on the literary masterpieces of Tuscany. This dictionary, the Vocabolario degli Accademici della Crusca, was a monumental undertaking and required an extensive collection of literary works for research. Cosimo II provided significant patronage to the Accademia, understanding the importance of a standardized national language for cultural unity and prestige. He ensured that the Accademia had access to the vast Medici family libraries, including the Laurentian, but he also supported the development of a dedicated collection specifically for the Accademia's work. This collection, curated under Cosimo II's guidance, focused on Italian literature, particularly works from the Golden Age of Florentine writing Dante, Petrarch, and Boccaccio. Editions and manuscript copies of their works, allowing the academicians to compare texts and determine the most authentic and grammatically pure versions. The library also contained a wide array of other Italian literary works, from early poetry to contemporary prose. This provided the raw material for the dictionary, allowing the academicians to gather words, phrases, and grammatical constructions from a broad spectrum of Italian writing. The collection was not merely a passive repository, it was an active workshop for linguistic research. Cosimo II ensured the Accademia received copies of important new publications in Italian. This included plays, historical narratives, and scientific works written in the vernacular. This demonstrated a commitment not just to historical purity, but also to the ongoing development of the Italian language. The Grand Duke would regularly receive updates on the Accademia's progress and often visited their sessions. He saw the work of the dictionary as a crucial contribution to Florentine and Italian culture. The library's holdings directly supported this effort, making the vocabulario possible. Beyond the Accademia, Cosimo II also maintained and expanded the General Grand Ducal Library. He inherited the broad scientific interests of his father, Ferdinando I. He was famously a patron of Galileo Galilei, and his library contained many astronomical treatises, including Galileo's own works. This showed a continued Medici commitment to scientific advancement, bridging the humanities and the sciences. The books collected specifically for the Accademia della Crusca were housed in a dedicated space, likely within the Accademia's premises or in close proximity. These were working tools constantly consulted by the academicians as they painstakingly compiled their dictionary. The collection was carefully catalogued and organized to facilitate their research. The legacy of Cosimo II's focus on the Italian language through the Accademia della Crusca was profound. The vocabulario became the definitive dictionary of Italian for centuries, shaping the language and influencing subsequent dictionaries in other European languages. This achievement was directly supported by the specialized library assembled under Cosimo II's patronage. It demonstrated how the Medici's obsession with books could be channeled into very specific, impactful intellectual projects, ensuring the lasting vitality of the Italian language. Number 10, Cardinal Leopoldo de Medici's Cabinet of Curiosities and Art Texts, a later Medici's refined taste. Cardinal Leopoldo de Medici, active in the mid-17th century, represents a later phase of Medici collecting. While his ancestors focused on classical texts and state documents, Leopoldo, a younger son of Grand Duke Cosimo II, developed a highly refined and specialized interest in art, science, and a broader concept of curiosities. His personal library was an extension of his famous Wunderkammer, or Cabinet of Curiosities, a collection that blended natural history, art, and rare objects with an equally rare collection of books. Leopoldo was not destined for political rule, which allowed him to pursue his intellectual passions with intense dedication. He was a brilliant and methodical collector, and his library reflected his wide-ranging and discerning tastes. He was a founding member of the Accademia del Cimento, one of Europe's first scientific societies, and his library provided crucial resources for its members. His collection of books on art theory, art history, and biographies of artists was particularly extensive. This was a novel area of collecting for its time. Leopoldo sought out treatises on painting, sculpture, and architecture, as well as descriptions of famous artworks. He wanted to understand the principles behind artistic creation and the lives of the masters. This interest directly informed his own role as a patron of many Baroque artists. Leopoldo also amassed an incredible collection of drawings and prints, which, while not books in the traditional sense, functioned as a visual library. These included works by masters like Raphael, Michelangelo, and Albrecht Dürer. He studied these closely, often annotating them and organizing them meticulously. This visual knowledge was complemented by the written works in his library. His scientific collection was also significant. Building on the family's patronage of Galileo, Leopoldo collected books on astronomy, optics, mechanics, and natural philosophy. He had a keen interest in instruments and experimented with lenses and telescopes himself. His library contained the latest scientific publications from across Europe, keeping him abreast of cutting-edge discoveries. The curiosity aspect of his library meant he collected books on diverse and sometimes unusual subjects, travelogues, ethnographic accounts of distant lands, books on monsters and marvels, and early works on archaeology. These reflected a fascination with the strange and wonderful, pushing the boundaries of what was considered collectible knowledge. Leopoldo's library was housed within his apartments in the Palazzo Pitti, designed to be both a private study and a display space for his treasures. The books were meticulously arranged and catalogued, often by subject and size. He personally supervised the acquisition and organization of his collection, showing a deep personal involvement. He employed agents and corresponded with booksellers across Europe to find specific volumes. He was known for his persistence in acquiring rare and unusual items. For example, he sought out early printed books with unique engravings or unusual binding. He understood the value of scarcity and uniqueness. Cardinal Leopoldo's library was a testament to the evolving nature of scholarly interests in the 17th century. It moved beyond the classical revival of the early Renaissance into a more specialized empirical and aesthetic mode of inquiry. His collection influenced the study of art history and laid groundwork for modern museum practices. Upon his death, Leopoldo's vast collections, including his library, were largely incorporated into the Grand Ducal collections, many finding their way into the Uffizi Gallery and other Florentine institutions. This act of consolidation ensured that his unique and specialized collection remained accessible and preserved, adding a new dimension to the enduring legacy of Medici patronage and their relentless pursuit of knowledge in all its fascinating forms.